Hello, and welcome to my thought on a very hot Sunday in London. I'm not complaining because I think we've waited a long time for summer. But the thing I'm going to talk about today is not necessarily very funny, um, but it's thoughtful. I just was reading that Britain still does not have a no-fault divorce, and I keep thinking of my divorces. Now, most of you have heard the comedy that I do about my two divorces, uh, which I will do for you shortly. But I think that what happens with people, it always reminds me of William David Thoreau, People Live Lives of Quiet Desperation, is that people stay in a relationship after um, they've outgrown each other, and they do it because one, they think they should. Two, they promised to stay for life, and three, it's too frightening, terrifying to go it alone. I don't want to forget before I go into this serious topic that I do have a book. It's called Getting the Last Laugh. Um, if you want to read about making your dreams come true, come on, I'll get it. It's on Amazon, and also on Amazon is my new book, Ridiculously Old, which I am, and Getting Better, which I doubt. But it's also on Amazon, and that has a real publisher, which is so shocking to me. I cannot believe it. So be sure to look at those books and enlarge your horizon. Now, getting back to divorce. I don't believe in marriage. You may object, but I don't believe in locking people into a relationship. And my favorite story with that is my friends David and Allison. I met them, it must have been 1990, and they never married. Um, they stayed together, and they had a little girl named Shona, and they've lived together. They're still together. And the thing that I love about it is that there was no piece of paper that bound them, although as life goes on, life binds you. They were living in a house. I believe it was Allison's house. David was the Better Beverage company in Edinburgh, those of you who know, wonderful coffee. Uh, and then they had Shona. So those things were binding them together, but there was no piece of paper. And if things went belly up, David could leave, Allison could leave, uh, they could do it. And there would be very little legal falderall, except who gets what when they divide what they've got in the house. Um, I believe in that. I believe that's absolutely beautiful, and I believe that, and I'm sure they had their ups and downs. I keep remembering my friend Ellen Bordy was her last name. When she was young, very young, I think 18, 17, she never graduated from high school in America. She married a Romanian, I think he was a football star. I think it was football, but it was a sports star. She married him. His name was John. And because she was pregnant. And in those days, nowadays, I suppose, and especially in Britain, where abortion is possible, medically possible, in those days it was medically, you were running a terrible risk. She married him because she was going to have a baby, and she had a beautiful baby named Eileen, who was a treasure to the world, and I'm sure she never has regretted that. However, the marriage went from not too great to horrible. And when I met her, she had Caroline and Eileen, and they had a terrible, terrible relationship. And it was terrible for the children, who were by that time teenagers. And I remember Caroline calling me up and saying, "Can you make them stop screaming at each other?" And I, who was a product of two divorces, I couldn't understand why she was staying with him. But I have to go back. And she did not divorce him. What she did is she became a devout Lutheran, and the marriage staggered on. But I have every year since I've been born has gotten better and better. But I have always, when I turned 50, I was alone. And because I was alone, I was able to make a beautiful life for myself. And when I hear of people that are stuck in a relationship that neither of them want, I think, what has society done to us? Why is this happening? But on the other hand, I will see people. I remember my friend Natalie, who was just, my God, she hated this man she was married to, and I thought, she's going to kill him. And then after a few months, they sort of went back together again, and now she's still living with him. So maybe I'm wrong, and you all can make comments about that. But I had, as you know, 2 divorces, and I considered each one of them a blessing, because I, like my friend Ellen Bordy, and like many people I know, would not have left my husband, because I believed I had made a commitment and I was not about to abrogate it. I do want to talk once more about my parents. My mother, I don't think she liked my father. I really don't think she liked my father. She married him. He adored her, which is beautiful. And I love to tell the story. Daddy was not a very good-looking man, and my mother was exquisite. I know it's hard to believe when you look at me that I had an exquisite mother, but I really did. She was just gorgeous. And he just adored her. He adored her, and he did everything for her. But for her, marriage was a disappointment and a chore. And I think my mother yelled at my father every day of his life, and my father still loved her. And I remember, and so when we look at things from the outside, I'm not sure we see them accurately, because I don't think we bring the whole person into, because we don't know them, into the mix. Because I remember my mother yelling at my father constantly, always criticizing him. He never did anything right. And I thought, oh my God, why is he sticking with her? And then he had, I believe it was a heart bypass, but it was a very serious operation, and she thought she was going to lose him. And when she thought she was going to lose him, she realized that he was her meal ticket. He was her passage to propriety, and he was her ticket to being what my mother wanted, which was American, which is something that I don't understand, but she did. And I wrote a novel called Love Comes Last, because I believe that at the end she did love him, or she did realize how valuable he was. But it took something like that to jolt her into realizing that this man had devoted his life to her. Every single thing he did was for her. And the thing that interested me is when my mother died, I thought, oh boy, now Daddy will marry my cute little Aunt Tick, which is my mother's baby sister, and the one you've all heard me tell stories about. She was the one that had the canary, that she vacuumed up the canary. Absolutely loved my Aunt Tick. And she was a gentle, sweet, loving little lady. And Daddy was very quiet, and he was very passive. He was not in business. He was not passive. That's how he became a millionaire. But he was very aggressive in business. But in relationship to the people, and I used to love when Daddy and I would talk, because his philosophy was so beautiful. It was accepting who the person was. And those of you who talk to me or have listened to these, the philosophy that I'm spouting to you is pretty much based on what Daddy taught me when he used to drive me to a school every now and then and give me his take on life. So when my mother died, and my mother died when she was 77, Daddy was 77, I thought, oh boy, now he'll marry my cute Aunt Tick, and they will live happily ever after. It was my Uncle Harry, who was also very feisty and very opinionated, just like my mother, had died, and Aunt Tick was single. And I thought, that's what's going to happen, but that isn't what happened. What happened is that my father could not live without my mother. And I always tell the story about how Daddy loved her so much that when she would get dressed in her designer dresses and her mink coats, she had many, and her perfume, my mother always smelled like a flower garden. It was just beautiful, which amazed me because she didn't bathe that much, but she always smelled so good. And he would take her out, and he was not a very handsome man, and they would go to dinner, or they would go to visit people because they weren't social as we are now. They weren't much for theater, much for opera, much for ballet, but they went to each other's houses. That's how they did. And he would wear my mother like a jewel. She was on his arm, and she was beautiful. And I'm reminded here of why older men want younger women, because it's a trophy. Look, I'm in my late 60s, I'm in my 70s, and I've got this beautiful 40 or 50-year-old woman. And I often wonder what happens when that erection that they've been counting on all these years suddenly turns to the consistency of brie. How the women handle that. I'm guessing if they married enough money, they put up with it. But anyway, at any rate, what happened with my father is that he couldn't live without her, and he spent the next 6 months after she died, settling her estate, which was really all his money. It was all his money. And I remember he called me up and he said, "Lynn Ruth, I've got her estate all settled." And I said, "That's wonderful, Daddy." And the next day my sister called me and said, "Daddy died in the best way you can die, the second best way you can die." And I said, "What's that?" And she said he was at the Big Boy hamburger joint, and he had a hamburger, ate it, and then dropped dead. He got an embolism and he died. But he could not live without my mother. So when I look at these relationships, I often wonder two things, and I'm going to be telling you about my two in a minute, and that'll make you laugh. They make me cry, but I'll make you laugh. That maybe in my case, and maybe in a lot of other cases, we didn't stick it out long enough. Because marriage is compromise, and marriage is adjustment. And the truth is that if you have a happy marriage and a satisfying marriage, you live longer, you're happier, and you know your place in the world and in life. I really have never had any trouble knowing my place in life. But I think that having a partner would have been a beautiful security. And I was unable to make that happen. So the story of my first marriage is probably the only one I'll tell you because I don't want this to get too long. We'll see how long it goes. But I had a roommate named Ginger Livingston, and she, like my mother, was exquisite, absolutely exquisite. And she was dating a man named Tommy Trieger, who was very skinny, and he wore horn-rimmed glasses, and he was very intense and very intelligent. And Ginger was not too bright, but my God, she was beautiful. And they dated at the University of Michigan, and they became pinned. And those of you who don't know what pinned is, we were in sororities and fraternities, and we exchanged pins. They became pinned. And then Tommy went to Korea after graduation, because Tommy was a year older than we were. And I had always liked him because he was serious, and he seemed deep. I've always liked that. I always say my mind is my erogenous zone, and it still is. If you can carry on a good philosophical conversation with me about how many angels can dance on the end of a pin, I will fall in love with you on the instant. That's what I am. So I sort of liked Tommy, but he was Ginger's, and Ginger was my roommate, and I really loved Ginger because Ginger was the second person to make me feel that I was a human being and someone you could live with. My mother and my sister worked very hard to make me feel that I was a piece of trash. And Ginger, I'll never forget, Ginger called me, wrote me, I was at the University of Michigan, and Ginger said, "Let's be roommates." And I said, "Oh, you don't want to be roommate with me. I'm impossible." And she said, "You are the most possible person I know." And I spent 2 years as her roommate and learned by watching her how to love myself. So I was very loyal to Ginger. And Tommy left now for Korea. And Ginger and I, senior year, I still had no one. And Ginger would write Tommy. Actually, I did a lot of the writing because Ginger was not much at writing things. And then Ginger got the chicken pox. And in the meantime, there was another boy in the ZBT house fraternity that liked Ginger and wanted to go out with her. But she was very loyal to Tommy. She was pinned. And she had promised herself to him. And but she got chicken pox. And when she got chicken pox, David, his name is David Smerling, and he's still alive, and he's a wonderful, wonderful man. He decided he was going to win her over. Now, I don't know the full story because I was looking from the outside, but I know that he visited her with chickenpox, a little redhead with chickenpox, every day that she was sick. And when she got out of the hospital, and with her chickenpox cured, she said to me, "I'm going to marry David Smerling." And I said, because I'm an idealist, "You can't do that." I said, "You can't do that. This Tommy Trieger is fighting for our country, and you're going to write him and tell him that you don't want him anymore?" And she said, "Lynn Ruth, I'm not going to write him. You are." So because I love Ginger and because I can write, as everybody knows, I write books, I wrote what we call in America the Dear John letter. And I made it as nice and as tried to cushion it as much as I could. And Ginger married David Smerling the summer after we graduated. That year, Tommy came back for a furlough, and he tried to reinstate the relationship. And Ginger had made up her mind. And Ginger was very, very intelligent about relationships. Ginger was not the smartest woman on the pike. She managed to get through the University of Michigan just, but she was very smart, very street smart, and very smart about relationships. And when I said to her, you can't just dump Tommy Trieger, she said, "I know me. My mother has brought me up. We've lived very comfortably. I've never wanted for a thing. I've never known what it's like to economize. If I marry Tommy, we'll have at least 2 or 3 years where we won't have any money, and I won't know how to handle it. Because I've never, ever had to worry about what something cost. I've never, ever had to think that when I wanted something, I have always been able to get it. I've never, ever thought that's too expensive. I can't live in what I think is a nice place." And I'm an idealist. I'm thinking, well, I would live in a hut with whoever I loved. I would live in a pile of dirt if I loved them. And as most of you know, I have never loved anyone, ever, including the 2 husbands. But I believe that. And she said to me, if I marry David's family is extremely wealthy. I will be able to live the same standard of living I am used to. I know how to adjust to it. I know how to live the wealthy life. And most people who are nouveau riche do not know how to live the wealthy life. But these are people that support the arts. These are people that take vacations that most of us would never dream of taking, or maybe take once in a lifetime, and they do that every year. They have several houses. And this is the kind of life that Ginger decided she wanted. I was in the wedding. I caught the bouquet. And they are still married. Ginger, at this point, has Lou Gehrig's disease, which is extremely sad. She is still, at 87, exquisite. Just exquisite. And David is remodeling the house so that she can have her last years in as much comfort as possible. This is a marriage that lasted from 1955 until now. You do the math. Meanwhile, and that went blank. Meanwhile, Tommy came back for the furlough, and we went out for coffee. And I remember just feeling so sorry for him. Just he didn't know what happened, and I was as comforting as I could be. And then I forgot about him. Then I graduated, and remember I caught the bouquet, and I was in Ginger's wedding, and it was a beautiful wedding. And then I went to teach in Cleveland with a woman named Ruthie Landy, and I lived in her place, and it was really lovely. And I was teaching at Belvoir School in Cleveland Heights, and I loved my children, and I loved my teaching. But in those days, you needed to have a husband. You needed to have a husband if you wanted to lead a good life. If you didn't get a husband in those days, this is 1956, you would either be a secretary, a librarian, or a prostitute, or a wife, and all those were the same thing. You still were serving men, watering plants, and being a servant. I wanted to be a wife. It had more prestige. And besides, I could cook dinners and I could have babies. And those of you who know me know that the one thing I wanted more than anything in the world was lots and lots of babies. That dream didn't come true, did it? I was in Cleveland, and I was dating a man named Jerry who had a candy shop. And he had a standard poodle named Bon Bon, and I really liked him, but I didn't really turn him on, which I believe is the story of my life. A lot of men love having conversations with me, usually about their problems with their mothers and their girlfriends, but when it comes to the nitty-gritty of actually turning a man on, as my mother said, you couldn't even turn on a radio, and evidently I couldn't. So I sat down on Valentine's Day after this, when I started teaching, and I sent a Valentine to every man who had ever paid any attention to me at all. And among those that I sent the Valentine to, I sent one to Tommy Trieger, and I didn't know his address. So I sent it to Lieutenant Thomas Trieger, stationed somewhere in the APO San Francisco, stationed somewhere in the Middle East. These days, that letter would never have gotten to him. I sent it out in February, on Valentine's Day, and then continued on my unhappy life, nurturing an eating disorder and becoming more and more depressed and more unhappy, and then I got scarlet fever. And before I got scarlet fever, right before I got scarlet fever, I got a letter. It was in April. It took that long, and the letter was from Tommy Trieger, and he said, "I am flying through Cleveland on my way to New York. I'd like to take you out for dinner." And that was how I managed to get this poor, innocent man to propose to me. I picked him up at the Cleveland airport, and at that time, I had just contracted scarlet fever, but I didn't know it. I knew it the next day. I picked him up at the airport. We went out for dinner. What I remember is we talked all night. We didn't do anything. People didn't in those days, but we talked all night, and his flight was the next morning. And in that time, since I was the first American he had seen, and I always say what had happened is he expected me to treat him like the Korean women that he'd been sleeping with. He expected me to cook them dinner and iron his shirts and give him happy endings. And the happy ending that I got was a proposal for marriage, not the happy ending that Tommy expected me to get, and I never did give him that kind of happy ending. So we married in April. We married in September, and he went to Harvard Business School, and I realized we married in September, so I realized in August that I was in love with love and I was in love with marriage, but I wasn't in love with Tommy Trieger. And that's in my book, Starving Hearts. And if you want to read about that marriage, Starving Hearts, it's on Amazon. And now you can only get it used in America, but you can get it new from me in the UK. And I was miserably unhappy. And but I did manage to put him through Harvard Business School by teaching. And I was also starving myself because I had anorexia. And then Tommy decided he wanted to move back to Toledo, Ohio, the one place I didn't want to live in ever, because I never wanted to see my mother or my sister again, but I did. And we moved back to Toledo, and we furnished an absolutely beautiful apartment. I remember that, because my father hired Tommy and gave him an outrageously large salary. But Tommy insisted that I still work because my salary would provide the luxuries, the little things. Remember, we were graduates of the University of Michigan. We wanted to go to theater. We wanted to go to, Tommy wanted to go to the football games at Michigan. We wanted to be able to travel. And I just wanted to have babies. And I wanted to be happy. But it wasn't working out that well for me. And one day, we were playing bridge, and Tommy, with another couple, Dick Klein and Muggsy, also from the University of Michigan, and Tommy and Richard Klein were discussing how they were going to buy series tickets to the football games at the University of Michigan. And for the first time in 2 years, I talked back. I said, well, I don't want to go to those games. I don't like football. I want to use that money for a concert series ticket at the Peristyle in the Toledo, Ohio. And Tommy said nothing. He just took his glass and he threw it at me, and the ice on the glass cut my forehead and blood was coming down my face. And Dick Klein and Muggsy left, and Tommy slept on the couch. And the next day he said, I'm leaving. And I have always said that the sweetest words until this moment that you can ever say is, I love you. But the sweetest words I ever heard were, I love you, hon. I'm leaving, hon. I'm leaving, hon. And we went to my father and told him that we were leaving. And my father was distraught. My father loved Tommy. He had just hired him. And he said to me, do you know what you're doing? And I said, finally. And Tommy said to me, I'll stay with you if you go to a psychiatrist. And he was right, because I was loopy. I had the eating disorder. It was terrible. And he said, and if you go to the football games, and if you do all the things I want you to do. And I said to him, do you love me? And he said, I'm not sure. And I said, if you're not sure, let's not bother, because it'll never work unless you love me. But I never asked if I loved him, because I did not. So I want to get back, because I see that I'm talking for 28 minutes, and that's too long for this thing. I want to get back to this problem of divorce. If Tommy Trieger had not left me at that moment, I would be dead. If we had been living in Britain, where there was no fault, where they wouldn't allow a no-fault divorce, if Tommy had not wanted to leave me, if I had not wanted Tommy to leave me, I could have stopped him. And I'm going to end this with what happened at the end. This is really not a very happy thought. I promise next time I'll do something funny. When Tommy left after we were in my father's office, and I told him, I said, go home. And with the money that I had earned, I sent him home with all his wedding gifts and an automobile. And Tommy's father was a lawyer, so they arranged the divorce. I never got a penny from that divorce, and I did not want a penny from that divorce. And that night, after he left, I had an eating binge which was so immense that when I read Time magazine the next morning about a woman who had eaten about one half of what I'd eaten and her stomach split. I'd eaten all that. And then my uncle called me that morning, that after Tommy left, and he said, "Linda Ruth, I have a baby for you." Because evidently my mother had said that I hadn't, my mother wanted to be a grandma so that she'd look good for her Hadassah group, because I was married and I hadn't produced anything. And she had told my uncle that I wasn't having a baby, and he was a lawyer. In those days, rich young ladies that were having babies without husbands would give their babies away, and they would give them to a lawyer to place. And my uncle had said to me, he had a baby, and he called me and said, "Do you want this baby?" My uncle had called the day before. I would not have let Tommy leave. So the only reason that I am here today is because there was no fault divorce in America. And it seems to me that this is something that every civilized country should have. Because when you're brave enough to realize it isn't working, you should have the option of walking away and starting a new life. And again, I'm going to remind you, I have a good book, The Last Laugh. The story of that marriage is Starving Hearts. You can have that on Amazon, or by sending me a note on Facebook. I'll send it to you for, I think it's £10 plus postage. And I want to thank you for joining me on this very thoughtful thought on a Sunday. I did it on a Sunday.